Welcome, and thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I am Bridget Burns, the Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
And we are so excited to join with you today and have a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor. But first, our introduction. As I mentioned, we have a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor, and today we have a fantastic guest who I met in the last, only because of COVID did I get to know this guy, and it's been a true delight. So, but the point of the conversation is for us to uplift you and give you some perspective for the week ahead. That's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
And today we're joined by Russell Lowery-Hart, who's been president of Amarillo College since 2014. Amarillo was named a 2021 top 5 institution and rising star in the annual competition for the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So how are you holding up right now? That's kind of how we would typically start the day.
I think that the challenge for all of us, no matter what our role is to just hold up. And what I've learned in COVID is that this is a challenge that I've never experienced before. I've never worried about issues like depression and not wanting to go to work and not wanting to manage the latest crisis. And those are things that I am dealing with on a weekly basis now, and needing to acknowledge that my colleagues that I work with every day are probably facing the same challenges. COVID sucks. There's no right answers in managing it. There's just a sea of wrong answers to pick from. And so I just think we have to walk in positive intent and in love and take care of ourselves in the process. And I've never had to intentionally worry about that before, and I am now.
It's especially difficult because it's I wouldn't say never ending, but it ain't ending yet, and we've been sprinting, all of us, in various capacities and ways for 18 months. I'm guessing that your folks wanted to get a sense of sort of whether you feel like your folks got any meaningful downtime to recover. I mean, we certainly saw a traffic decline, and we saw evidence that people were taking at least a little bit of a pause, but do you think that the sort of open-endedness of this, and unfortunately it seems to be somewhat open-ended going forward as well, that's got to be contributing to the toll?
Yeah, I think the uncertainty and the ambiguity of the timeline has just created a general, I don't want to say malaise, because I think we're doing better work now than we've ever done before. But just exhaustion. And I do think that people took time away, and I think schools have done a really good job of giving employees time to recoup. But it's hard to recoup when, even if you're not at work, you're trying to manage family and kids that are dealing with a COVID world that has shifted their work and their learning. It's changed everything. And when we thought there was, if we can just get through this time, which for us was if we could just get through initially the spring semester, and then it was if we could just get through fall, and then we had another spring where COVID decimated our community, and then we were like, well, if we can just get through the summer, if we can just get the fall launched with people vaccinated, we could see an end to the general difficulty and uncertainty, and there hasn't been an end to it.
I just first so appreciate you being so open about the real challenge of leading right now, because it is hard to not just be a human being. And so I like that everyone is struggling with mental health and depression and different, like, as the waves of the burnout hits you. I saw something that said that, it's not that the burnout is back, it's that it never left.
Yeah.
That we kind of like got a gasp of air in July because we thought we were maybe going to get somewhere. But it is really important for folks to think about, A, you're not alone, and B, finding spaces to share with others who have figured out maybe one one way to get an inch closer, one way to improve one small thing, because I just don't think anyone has this totally figured out. It's little tinkering and just trying and keep uplifted, positive, hopeful, optimistic, anything that works.
One, I think we have to acknowledge that it's hard, and that it's hard for me. And I think the greatest gift that I think we've been able to embrace at Amarillo College is just to acknowledge that it's a struggle. And we've talked a lot about mental health. We've taken mental health days. We've taken opportunities to allow our employees and ourselves to manage as they need to, when they need to, without much judgment. Just a whole lot of love and understanding. And I think that starts with those of us that are charged with leadership roles. We can't pretend like things are okay when they're not. And I think the best way forward is to acknowledge the difficulty and thank people for fighting through it and giving us some hope in the process.
It's a really interesting balancing act, though, as a leader, I think, because there's so much tendency among leaders to sort of show strength and show. So I'm curious. Do you think it has changed how you view that balancing act?
Completely. I think employees know when we are living in corporate message or when we're being authentic and genuine. And I think if anything, that COVID has created a scenario where we yearn for authenticity and genuine connection. And a lot of times we've not learned how to do that in a mediated format. And I think the weekly wisdom show that you all do is an example of how we've used a new way to connect with people genuinely and authentically. And I think that gives people hope that I'm not living an inauthentic life. I'm acknowledging where my own struggles are. I'm acknowledging my own fears for my kids as they start their college career, and acknowledging when I don't know the answer to something. And strangely, my colleagues at Amarillo College have responded to that, have appreciated it, and I think we've actually increased our unity and connection because of it.
I do think that's true across the board, is that for places that have not tried to posture and pretend that everything's okay, I think there's a level of closeness. And I don't think the word colleague doesn't seem to apply anymore. It's we're all kind of in the foxhole together. And I think that people have shown a bit more of themselves. So, well, that's a very real way to ground this conversation. And I was sharing at the beginning of the break that, it's super important to share the stuff that's helping, because nobody has this figured out. And the thing that we're trying right now, because we've always been virtual and I can just see the burnout in people's eyes on Zoom, is switching to Quiet Fridays. And, I think that anymore, a 2-day weekend is just insufficient. It was sufficient perhaps prior to COVID, but I just don't think 2 days to recover is really enough for people anymore. And I don't know that anyone's getting anything good done in meetings from noon to 5 on a Friday. And so just no meetings is our number one rule, but people getting a chance to actually catch up and take their breath. And I don't want anyone really working until 5 p.m., staring at their screen, clicking refresh. That's not their job is to recover, so that on Monday they can be fresh and bring the best ideas to the table. So that's what we're doing now. So I hope it helps others. I definitely stole this idea from other people. I just have to remember who told it to me.
Well, we did this summer, we closed the college down at 1 p.m. on Fridays. But then when the fall started, I think we approached the fall as if this was going to be a move back to normal. And it's been anything but. And I think we're all going to have to consider things that you just articulated.
How are you, just quickly interested in getting a sense of what you're seeing from students? I mean, you presumably had students around an institution like yours during the summer as well. So it's not like you've got students, quote, just coming back for the first time. But what's your sense of, we've been focused sort of on what's going on with employees a little bit. What's your sense of what you're seeing with students?
What we're seeing with the students is the same thing that we're seeing with our employees. They're scared to come back, but they're scared not to come back. They're worried about their employment future outside the classroom. They know their education is a key to their economic mobility, but they're afraid to leave a job to get a skill that's going to pay them more in the future. And so what I've seen, I don't know if other people have, is that there is much less inclination to focus on what tomorrow is like. We're just worrying about today, this week. And as a result, I think it's harder to sell the value of a long-term degree. I think students are focused on, I need a skill right now that can get hired right now. And we're having to pivot as a result. Those long-term degrees and transfer degrees are where our enrollment's struggling. The immediacy of an 8 or 10 week credential is where we can't meet the demand enough.
It's interesting because that's obviously the direction that a lot of people have been saying higher ed kind of needed to move in anyway. So maybe there's a bright side of silver lining of speeding that up, while not maybe forgetting that they've got to be stackable so that ultimately there are ways for students to come back.
I think completely have to be stackable, but in the environment we're in, if we can give some hope that you can get a hireable skill set in 8 weeks that will apply to this long-term degree, we can show a path, a stackable path, but there's some immediacy that they're needing right now. But I think the result of that feeds into the employee burnout. It's not just that we're having to redo our jobs in COVID, it's that we're having to think the very structures of our jobs during COVID. It's not enough to teach a class in 16 weeks. Now we're having to rethink entire degree programs within a skill-based accelerated environment of 8 and 10 weeks, and managing different modalities while we're doing it. And that's the opportunity we have, the disruption we have in higher education, if we'll take it. But it's hard to take it and embrace it when we're all just so freaking tired.
Yeah, I mean, this will be the hard thing, right? Is navigating how do we leverage the confidence that we frankly have earned from this change. Everyone technically should feel more confident because you've done things that you should have never been able to do. And we've innovated and adapted. And that normally in any normal circumstance would actually be a source of confidence and inspiration. And so, but with the countervailing influence of burnout and just how hard it is to be a human being right now, it's just a question of like, what adaptations do we need to implement to be able to get us to that next space? Because I think you're right that it will be on the tail end of COVID that we're able to actually implement some of the stuff that was never going to be possible. We don't do that here. Really, we called the question on that.
I think there's so many things that we've learned about our abilities during COVID. And I think the leadership challenge then is to find the 1 or 2 big things that we can implement at scale now, when there could be 10 things that we could implement at scale now. But let's find the 1 or 2 things that we can successfully implement in the context of rethinking everything that we're doing, and meet the needs of the students that might not see themselves as needing higher education otherwise.
So I want to turn us to a uplifting topic. Sorry, we always want to try and be hopeful. And you actually have the best news in higher ed. You've had the best news of you're now the 3rd person that we brought on the show who's gone through the experience of receiving either the best email or the best phone call. I don't know, anyone could ever get as a leader in higher ed. And so I want you to talk us through what was it like to get the information that you were now a recipient of Mackenzie Scott's generosity, and how do you see this impacting your work?
It was so surreal. We got an email that was so cryptic that I went to my vice president of advancement and I'm like, is this real? And we both agreed that it probably wasn't, and almost didn't follow through on it. But we had an email that asked us to schedule a phone call. We scheduled that phone call, and within a week we had a $15 million gift wired into our bank account without the typical grant strings that require all kinds of stuff. It was basically, they said, we know who you are and what you've accomplished, and we believe that you know what your community needs more than we do. Go use this money to change your community. And it's just an amazing blessing that we're just now trying to figure out how to navigate. So our approach was to use a small portion of the $15 million to immediately benefit our community based on some of the lessons we learned from COVID, while we put the rest in an endowment and spend the next year as a college and community making long-term plans for how that gift can best help us tackle the barriers of poverty that are choking our community.
So, but talk to me about when you got that news. So you didn't think it was real, but when you figured out that it was actually happening, what was your reaction? And were you alone or were you with your team? Like, walk us through that.
I was alone. And Bridget, you know me, I can talk. I was speechless. I couldn't process it. And, being the emotional person that I am, started bawling like a baby. Because I knew what that gift, I told the person that we were visiting with that this gift would be transformative for our community on so many different levels that don't necessarily have anything to do with just the money, but the vote of confidence that that gift says our community is important, that our community's college is important, that we felt seen. And that's been as important as the money itself, I think.
That's good. And we're trying to give everyone the gift of like, pretend it's you. Walk through, take us through this experience so we can pretend. And for many folks, because I don't expect that is the last round, they will be in that position, and it will give them the benefit of, oh gosh, what would I do?
Well, I talked to a couple of other schools who'd been through the cycle of giving before we were, and asked them, what lessons they learned. And I hope we've been able to learn from those, have an immediate impact for us. That is providing us immediate skill-based learning, non-credit learning for people in coding and cloud computing that lead to a job, and using the gift to pay that tuition with a universal income stipend, while we figure out what is long-term. But the schools that I talked to said if they could go back and do it again, there would have been an immediate impact on the community while they were planning. And so that's what we've done, and I'm kind of excited about it. It's just been an amazing experience. We're not used to that kind of stuff here in Amarillo, Texas.
That's exciting.
Go, keep going, Bridget.
Well, I guess the next thing, I think that you've shared a bit about some of the wisdom that you've distilled from going through the pandemic in terms of leading with you. It's confirmed that being as a vulnerable leader like you are is the right move, and that your people appreciate you showing up authentically. But you've also had a chance to watch other leaders, whether it's in the press or, in community. Any lessons that you've observed from watching other leaders, how they've navigated this, good or bad, that has actually added to your knowledge of what leadership is?
The need for transparency and honesty. I think being vulnerable enough to say, I don't know. I watch some leaders do that, and I think we're often insecure about saying we don't know when we're in these positions. And I saw some really authentic leaders who transparently said, I don't know, and I've embraced that. And here are the things that I don't know, and here's what I'm trying to know. And just being transparent about the process that we're using to make decisions, not just to talk about the decisions themselves, has had the biggest impact on me and my college, I think. When the other thing that I've learned is how to use the technology to stay connected to our college and our students. And I had a couple of virtual town halls based on what I saw a couple of my colleagues doing, and they became so important that they became scheduled and people looked forward to them. And it was just a way to build unity and share information and engage in communication with this technology that we were loath to use before, that's now become an integrated, permanent part of our experience.
That's great.
How are you thinking about the balance of that technology and in-person stuff going forward? I'm less thinking about the classroom stuff that we've been talking a lot about, but just about how you envision sort of continuing to use technology internally within your team and as a communication with students. Do you see that as having been changed irreparably?
I don't see how we go back, because listen, there are going to be times where we want to be in person, and we need that personal in-person face-to-face connection. But I think we'll be much more thoughtful about when we engage in those conversations and experiences, and much less flippant about requiring people to be in person in the same space. There'll be a need to be a purpose for it, because the technology, I think, has allowed our relationships to deepen and our communication to be more robust. And I'll give you an example. We had a General Assembly. We closed the college down every semester. We put signs up and say we're closing to study student success, and we usually do that in person. We did that virtually this year. I had more people that were engaged. We had more communication and more conversations because we've learned to leverage the technology in different ways. We had breakout groups, and the communication was immediate, where before we would be collecting information and then dissecting it, and it was all paper-based. We allowed the technology to deepen our relationships and communication with each other, and facilitate relationship building. We've learned how to do that in COVID, and I think we've got to embrace that as a long-term solution.
That's great. I want to shift to rapid fire before we end. And for folks who are watching live, you can also, of course, signal a question. I want to know the best advice that has served you in your career. And then I also, second, want to hear what advice you give most often to others who are interested in leading, who reach out to you.
I had a boss who recently passed away, Brian Chapman. He had a big influence on me in learning what kind of leader to be, and in some instances, what kind of leader I didn't want to be. But he said the best advice he gave me was never bring up a problem that you don't already have a potential solution for. Otherwise, you're just the person that complains. And being on this side now as a president, we get lots of complaints, but when people bring a complaint with a solution, even if it's not a solution that we embrace, there's a trust building there that means a lot to me. And I try to always be the solutions person, not the problems person.
And what's the advice that you most frequently give to others who are aspiring community college leaders?
Be your authentic self and say yes. You're going to be given lots of opportunities. People are going to ask a lot of things of you. And I get the conversation that we've engaged in about balance and there's power in saying no. I think if you're wanting to be a leader, any opportunity you have, say yes to it. There'll be value in being a person that solves someone else's problems. It'll integrate you into experiences that will only deepen your network and your skill set. And so the advice that I give the most is say yes as often as you can, and then be as authentic as you can.
Great. I think I would be remiss not to give you one last shot to answer this question, which I think I know your answer. You are, leading a community college. You have experience working with universities. You see how universities sometimes are not meeting the needs of your students, and they come back and actually end up using the services and support of your college while they are enrolled at four-year institutions. So you've been a vocal advocate for kindness and truly loving students. And I wonder if you had a magic wand to wave over the higher ed transfer experience or process, or how universities interact with community colleges. Is there one thing that you would change?
There's two things. I'll give you the one smaller one and then the bigger one. The one smaller one is just accept their transfer credits. The core should be the core. And what makes transfer so difficult is when our major requirements are pushed down onto the core. But what our students need more profoundly than anything is that they need universities to love them to success with the same intentionality that we're doing in the community college sector and that we're doing at Amarillo College. Our students are housing insecure, they're food insecure, they struggle to pay their bills, to pay their utilities, to struggle with issues of transportation and childcare. And they need you to be as intentional about those things as you are about their degree plans and their graduation rates. I see students that leave us every semester who come back to leverage our social services interventions because they don't have that support at their university. Those supports are important, but equally as important is that our students need to feel as loved and important in your environment in a university setting as they do here. That relational advocacy is as important as anything that you're teaching in the classroom when it comes to getting transfer students to graduate.
Well, that's perfect. That's what we will end with. I knew that you would hit it out of the park, per usual, in terms of the appeal that everyone needs to hear. So folks at home, if you would like to get in contact, Russell is actually tagged in the Twitter headline for this video, so you can easily reach out to him, and he's very active on social media, so great opportunity to sync up. And if you want to learn more about Amarillo College, I can't think of any better advocate. Doug, per usual, thanks for being an excellent co-host. Welcome back. There was a minute there where you sounded like the voice of God coming out through your audio, and it was just, I feel like it was a good opportunity for us all to remember how important you are. So otherwise, everyone have a wonderful week out in the front.